Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are at the moment, and very, very welcome to a new webinar of the Regeneration Biomedical here in Germany. Yeah, this webinar is a very special one because we want now to have a webinar about the science behind the bioresonance according to Paul Schmidt. Yeah, we have in the second part of this webinar a guest, and this will be Professor Dartsch from the Dartsch Scientific Institute, and we want to speak with him about in vitro studies and especially about the newest results regarding the influence of our dipole antenna system to cell tissues. Yeah. First of all, let us talk about the aim of bioresonance according to Paul Schmidt. What is the aim? The aim of our system is by using frequencies to stimulate a self-regulation in the organism of humans and animals. And when you have to explain bioresonance according to Paul Schmidt, we have a fantastic example by nature, and this is definitely our sunlight. And the question is, why does our skin turn brown in the sun? This is a very good question. And everybody knows that we will get brown when we are in the sunlight, but what is the reason behind? At the final end, it is not the warming of our skin, of course. It is, at the final end, the frequency of the ultraviolet light in a frequency range of 750 to around 1500 terahertz. This is a very high frequency. I will come back to this point also. The waveform of this frequency is a sinus waveform, and you know, under the influence of ultraviolet light, and that means under the influence of this frequency range, our body reacts with the production of melanin, for example, with pigments, or with the production of vitamin D. And this happens only when this frequency range is touching our skin. With other frequencies, this will not work. And therefore, this is the first idea of bioresonance according to Paul Schmidt and how you can explain. Because the devices from us are, I will say, like a flexible sun, like a frequency range which can be chosen by the user, and with different frequency ranges we can stimulate different regulatory mechanisms in the body. And therefore, the sunlight is such a fantastic example to explain bioresonance according to Paul Schmidt, because everybody knows that it is existing and it is a very nice picture. Yeah, we used the wording frequency and also amplitude, and I want to speak a little bit about this, because only with the right frequency, it is possible to stimulate specific tissues. I explained that with the example of sunlight, and it is exactly the basics of bioresonance according to Paul Schmidt. We need the right frequency. And you can see in the picture on the left side, so that you know what a frequency is, this starting at the 0 point is going to the maximum, back to the 0 point, to the minimum, and then to the final point where the start was. Yeah, and when we have exactly this vibration in 1 second, then we are talking about a frequency with 1 hertz. When this is 5 times in a second, it is 5 hertz. When it is 1000 times in a second, it is 1 kilohertz. 1 million is 1 megahertz. 1 billion is a gigahertz. And it is nearly unbelievable that something can change and vibrate with 1 billion cycles in a second. But you saw in the chart before that our sunlight has a frequency with a vibration and a frequency of more than 1000 terahertz. This is an unbelievable speed, but this is a frequency with a reaction in the body, therefore really unbelievable, but it is working, of course, we know. Yeah, and I think you know FM. It can be that you heard this, for example, when you are choosing a radio program. This is then then the frequency modulation. That means that a radio will receive the data with a modulation of the frequency. And when we are talking about an amplitude, like in the picture on the left side, we have the intensity in front of us. And then we can talk, for example, about AM. This is an amplitude modulation. That means that the data for a radio, for example, also will transfer with the changing of the intensity. At bioresonance, according to Paul Schmidt, it is not possible to change the intensity. And there is a very, very clear reason behind. The reason is that we worked out in the last 40 years the perfect intensity so that we cannot overstimulate the body, so that we cannot produce a side effect, and that at the final end, the user, the practitioner, cannot make a mistake. And another big advantage is the usage of the system is totally simple, because you have to choose a therapy program so that the device knows which frequency ranges you want to treat. And you can choose the time and the polarity, that's all, but not the intensity. And that's a great advantage, and especially regarding the safety of the usage. And we know that the usage is safe. I will come back to this point a little bit later. Yeah, and in the word bioresonance is also the wording resonance. And when we are talking about resonance, how can resonance be explained? That's the question. A fantastic possibility to explain resonance, of course, are tuning forks. And we prepared a special trial with 3 tuning forks to visualize you what resonance is, and to understand, and of course to explain it to your friends, to your patients, and so on. And I think we will now play the video. Yeah, tuning forks are a fantastic possibility to show the effect of resonance. You know, to have resonance, we have a need of 2 bodies which are vibrating on the same frequency. That means we have here 2 tuning forks on the frequency 440 Hertz. This is the tone A. And both tuning forks are working on this tone A with 440 Hertz. And of course, we are talking a little bit in a picture. That means we want to visualize with this the effect of bioresonance according to Paul Schmidt. And in our picture, this is our bioresonance device, and this is our body, or the body of an animal, for example. Yeah? And when we are now hitting here this tuning fork and stopping that, you can hear the tone on this side. That means this tuning fork was able to stimulate this one, because they are vibrating on the same frequency. Yeah, I can repeat that. Bioresonance device is working, stopping. The resonance works, vibrating is here, and I can stop. Yeah, and what will happen when we have now a different frequency with a different tuning fork? And now we have here, now we have here the tone A with 440 Hertz, and here a tuning fork with 1000 Hertz. I will hit again the tuning fork. Stop. You can hear nothing. And that means this tuning fork is not able to stimulate this one. Yeah, and in our picture, we can explain with that our experience about the last 40 years of bioresonance, according to Paul Schmidt, that under the stimulation of bioresonance, according to Paul Schmidt, we do not know side effects. The answer or the explanation for that is that when we have a frequency without a need in the body, nothing happened, and therefore we have now side effects. This is a very nice explanation of resonance and the tuning forks also. Yeah, tuning forks are really a perfect method to show what resonance is. And I think this visualization helps to understand at the final end also the usage and the basics behind bioresonance according to Paul Schmidt. Yeah, in this webinar we want to come over to very, very important scientists. And when we are talking about important scientists, we have to talk, of course, about Max Planck. And Max Planck said in the past, ultimately, all matter is vibration. And we choose this chart because this chart is the start in a number of charts we want to show to you now, which shows what is at the final end the fascination of bioresonance according to Paul Schmidt, and to explain, of course, scientific relationships, and to come step by step more to the explanation of, for example, our dipole antenna system. Yeah, Max Planck said, ultimately all matter is vibration, and you can see this picture here on the left side. This is an atom with the most simple atom. This is a hydrogen atom with one proton in the center and one electron around. And you know, when we are talking about matter and the investigation in this way, also the physical behavior and so on, we have to know that in the Middle Age, it was really believed, of course, that all matter was solid and it was not, and it is indivisible. And especially in 1915, the scientists Bohr and Sommerfeld discovered that matter consists of smaller parts, yes, and this was the time where the atomic model was born. And you know, atom is Greek, yes, it is indivisible. That means we cannot chemically divide it in smaller parts. Yeah, and let us speak about a little mind game. You know that in this hydrogen atom we have a proton and an electron, and there is a distance between both parts. And in case, for example, that this distance is not there, so that we have, for example, the situation on the right side in the picture, on the upper side, so that the delta is zero, then our world is 10,000 times smaller. That means me, for example, with 1.9 meter, I will be only 0.19 millimeter, yes, but with the same weight. Yes, our planet will have only a diameter of 4 kilometers. And this shows to us we are detecting our world only on the surfaces, but not really what is inside. And therefore we are recognizing shells, but not the actual content. Yes, and to have a look inside, this is exactly what it is necessary to understand, of course, what matter is at the final end. Yeah, and the crucial question is now that when our world, including the organism of humans and animals, or of course plants, is made of protons, neutrons and so on, what are these elementary particles are made of. Yeah, and quantum physics explain that, and especially the elementary particles, because they can have a behavior as a so-called corpuscle. This is like a particle, yes, or as a wave. And it is really true to come into this thinking. It is really related with a lot of mathematics and physical knowledge, of course, but especially the new Nobel Prizes were exactly related to these parts and about quantum physics. And this shows that we are going step by step, moreover, in the understanding and in the usage of this knowledge. And for bioresonance, according to Paul Schmidt, is this an unbelievable fact to say, ultimately, and now we are back at Max Planck, ultimately all matter is vibration. And when Heisenberg and Louis Victor de Broglie showed that all matter have wave-like characters and also a spin, this makes for us clear that our world consists, in the smallest parts, of oscillations. And when we develop this understanding for ourselves, then it is clear that we can, I will say, repair with frequency and frequency spectrums, and with polarization, with the right spins and so on, we can make a repairing in the body, especially with the frequencies and the frequency spectras of, for example, bioresonance devices. That's the basic idea, and this is the explanation why bioresonance, according to Paul Schmidt, is such a fascinating method. It is really a method, yes, and a medicine of the future. Yeah, and therefore, our approach, of course, is that anything, yes, and everything consists of oscillations and its interactions of resonance to each other. And with the right frequency and the right frequency spectrum, we can, I would say, repair, and this means we can treat humans and animals. But, and with this small introduction into the thinking of bioresonance according to Paul Schmidt, I want to go back to the past and to Paul Schmidt. Paul Schmidt discovered in 1975 that the frequencies, yes, of a frequency generator, this was the first investigation he made, that these frequency spectra have an effect to regulatory mechanisms in the body. But he recognized directly that a frequency generator will not be the right device to spread really the usage of bioresonance according to Paul Schmidt into the world, because the devices are definitely too expensive. And therefore he make a long research how he can emit frequency spectra with a system which is easier to produce so that everybody can use bioresonance according to Paul Schmidt. And what he detected and what he developed, yes, was the dipole antenna system according to Paul Schmidt. You can see this in the picture. These are metal rods on a special position together, and you can see exactly this dipole antenna system on this picture. A radiocomp PS10 with the dipole antenna system in it. A little bit later, in a few charts, we have another experiment here to show, and we will come back to this dipole antenna system of a Ryocomp PS10 and to show how it is working. But we have to develop a little bit our knowledge to understand what happened with the dipole antenna system in a PS10. Yeah, and this explanation was worked out in the last year, because I started on the 1st September in 2021 my doctorate, and the doctorate has the aim, yes, to make a basic research on the dipole antenna system and the performance and how to and how it is working and how to increase the performance and to optimize the performance. That's the basic idea of this doctorate. It means we want to have a look to the mathematical structure, to the physical structure. We want to work with a different parameterization of this dipole antenna system to understand what is the best effect. And of course, we want to simulate with software programs like COMSOL multiphysics exactly this dipole antenna system, and to visualize with that the frequency spectra of this dipole antenna system. Yeah, and the tasks are in the beginning now to realize 6 so-called ISPs. These are 6 individual study plans. Every ISP is related to the dipole antenna system. For example, one is to show exactly influences of the material, and the actual one I'm working on is the simulation with COMSOL multiphysics. And it is my hope to have in the near future here new material which I can present to you. And I think it is totally helpful to work out the basic research on this dipole antenna system. We have fantastic studies, but we need, of course, the mathematical and physical understanding of this system also to establish in the existing medical world the bioresonance according to Paul Schmidt, and give this system with this basic research also a fantastic fundament to be used worldwide. Yeah, of course, in this doctorate, international lectures must be made, international publications. Then I have to write a small doctorate thesis. And on this basis and the defense, I can qualify myself then for the large doctoral thesis. The plan is to realize that in 4 years. I will come over to you with new results over the next times. Yeah, and one of the results, for example, to show the functionality of the dipole antenna system. Yeah, and it is interesting to know how a dipole antenna can work. You can see here on the left side, this is the antenna rod. Yes, and we have 4 pictures, and this is like a cycle which shows how a frequency can emit it from a dipole antenna system. For example, in the you can see on T0 the electrons are on the lower dipole side. The E field is formed, but there is no current flowing, therefore the magnetic field is 0. You can see that. Then the electrons go back. Yes, this is a permanent fluctuation of electrons in this rod. This is exactly the way how a dipole antenna is working. And in a quarter of T, we have exactly the electrons on the way, then the current is in a maximum, therefore the magnetic field is present, and the E field is dissipating from the antenna rod. Yeah, and in the next pictures you can see that the electrons there are on the upper side, the E field is formed, the magnetic field is zero, then is going back, and you can see then that the circle is starting again. That's the way how frequencies are dissipating from a dipole rod. Yeah, and we have another very nice, not a picture, it is like a GIF. You can see how frequencies are dissipating from these dipole antenna. You can see in the middle is the dipole antenna rod, and the cycles I explained in the chart before are here visualized in this GIF. And you can see here how the frequencies are dissipating from these dipole antenna rod. You can see this is a very, very small frequency, and when we have really a gigahertz frequency, you have to visualize and to understand that this changing happens 1 billion times in a second. This is really unbelievable, but it is of course working. To visualize for you how a dipole antenna system directly from a bioresonance according to Paul Schmidt device from a PS10 is working, we prepared for you another small video clip, and we want to show to you with this video clip how a dipole antenna system regarding the devices of bioresonance according to Paul Schmidt is working. Yeah, we want to visualize with this trial how a dipole antenna works. You know that in each bioresonance according to Paul Schmidt device is integrated a dipole antenna system. And I can show to you this dipole antenna system here in this Ryocomp PS10. I will open the device so that I can show it to you. And you can see here in the middle the dipole antenna system of this Ryocomp PS10. The layer, the upper layer, can be turned here in this way. You can see that, so that we can change the angle to the layer which is under this dipole antenna system. Yeah, and the electronic you can see here or here is not for producing the frequencies. This is only to run the device, for example, to run the display, to run the keyboard, to run the green card, to run the polarizer, and so on, but not to produce the frequencies. This system has a different way of working, and I want to visualize this with another trial. And lucky-wise, a dipole antenna is very often used in the world for transmitting and for absorbing frequencies. And therefore, on universities and when we have courses for students in physics, the dipole antenna is very often used because there is especially a good possibility to find or to calculate from the Maxwell equation down to the working of a dipole antenna. So that this is, from the mathematical point of view, really complex, yes, but with this example I can show to you how a dipole antenna is really working. Yeah, and we have here this dipole antenna, yeah, and we have here a connection to this bulb, and when here on this dipole antenna, when this dipole antenna is absorbing the frequency, and this frequency is strong enough, then, and the reason for that is that the bulb is very slow, yes, in the reaction, and therefore we can absorb the frequencies and give the energy to the bulb. And in case that this trial will work, we can see the bulb is flashing. Okay, I will try this. I have here a generator of frequencies, and when I'm switching on this generator, you can see here directly that the bulb is flashing, and in regards to the angle I'm using, you can see it is flashing or not. Yeah, that is the way how a dipole antenna system in this case can emit or absorb frequencies. Yeah, and in case that we are changing here, or that I'm using this bulb here, and I will try this with the PS10. Hopefully it will work directly. The frequency is here also absorbed and can be shown then here with this small bulb. I will switch on the generator and we'll connect this here. And when I'm going here on top, you can see here that the bulb is really flashing. That means that this dipole antenna system of the PS10 can absorb the frequencies. Yeah, and with this example, we can show that the dipole antenna system is really able to emit frequencies, which we are giving here to this plate, going to the outputs via the cable and the detector. We can stimulate then with these frequencies coming from the PS10 the body of humans or of animals. Yeah, I think it was fascinating for you also how a dipole antenna of a Ryocom PS10 is working. Therefore, from our point of view, the next step in an explanation, in a scientific explanation, how our bioresonance devices are working. And of course, we need this fundamental research to establish the bioresonance, according to Paul Schmidt, in a better and in a faster way, especially in the medical world. We need two things. We need the fundament, the physical and the technical fundament, and the explanation, mathematically and from the physical point of view, but we need also the studies. Yeah, and the studies are totally important, especially to be a medical device producer. Then without these scientific investigations, without the application observations, without the in vitro studies, without the in vivo studies, it is not possible to be a medical device producer because you have to show for the notified body who is checking, for example, the Ryonex Biomedical each year, that our system in the medical field is working with significant effects and also in a very clear safety, so that nothing can happen to the patients. And this is exactly related to the studies we made in the past. We started very early with the study of Dr. Breyer. More than 500 patients were observed, and then we started with the first cell biological study from the Fraunhofer Institute in 2011. This was a very important study for us, which shows, first time in a cell biological way, that our system is working and have a significant and reproducible influence to cellular tissues. Yeah, and I think it was around 2011, we got also a contact to Professor Dr. Dartsch from the Dartsch Scientific Institute. And it takes a little bit to realize the first study, but this was then a study made with a placebo device and with a mini Ryonex, which is working. That means with a mini Ryonex with a dipole antenna system in it and not. And in a totally reproducible way, we can show that the mini Ryonex is able to activate the cell metabolism in a fantastic way, with more than, I think, 45% in 24 hours. But we will come back to this point a little bit later, because we have our guest here, and the guest is Professor Dr. Dartsch, and he will show to you exactly the newest research results from his institute regarding bioresonance, according to Paul Schmidt. Yeah, and of course we are working deep in the field of the veterinarian usage also. We had the first bachelor thesis in the veterinarian field made and written by Mrs. Alberts in the year 2015. Yeah, and of course we have also many applications and application observations. For example, one is in the cardiology from Dr. Fied. This is a hospital in Chemnitz, and he observed the influence especially on heart insufficiencies and the nearly unbelievable results you can realize with bioresonance, according to Paul Schmidt, with this disease. Yeah, and the absolute top study is the gold standard study, the RWS study from Dr. Schussmann. This is the most important study we realized here at Ryonex Biomedical GmbH, and this study is definitely the reason why Ryonex is at that time a medical device producer, and you need this high-level study, otherwise you have no chance to be such a medical device producer. And this exactly happens in the market around us. Are downgrading, most of the companies are downgraded to a wellness device producer, and we want to go deep in the medical field, and we want to establish a medical system, and we can do this only with medical devices. Therefore, it is for us so important to be a medical device producer. Yeah, and this RWS study from Dr. Schussmann is a totally scientific study, because we are working here in a double-blind randomized study. It means it is a clinical prospective, double-blind randomized, placebo-controlled study. That's a very long word, but this explains why it is a gold standard study. Yes, and you can see here in the pictures that we are working with placebo devices and with a Varum device. A placebo device has no dipole antenna system in it, and the Varum device is a normal device which we are producing here, and with a dipole antenna system in it, of course. Yeah, and the most important point is that in a double-blind randomized study, these devices were closed, got from the authorities a number. Nobody knows what is a Varum, what is a placebo device. Not the medical doctor, not the patient knows with which device he is treated. And that is the reason that this kind of study is the highest and with the highest scientific evidence study we can produce. And after each data is produced, after each therapy is done, then the unblinding happens, so that after that, when everything is ready, we did an unblinding, so that then the patient knows, okay, I was in the Varum group, I was in the placebo group, and the medical doctor knows, okay, I treated this patient with Varum and so on. But all the data were then realized and written, and so that nobody knows during the study with which device they was treated. Yeah, it was really important to do that, because we have the clear aim to show the efficacy of our system, and also in a secondary study objective, the safety. Yes, and this is measured by the incidence of adverse events. Yeah, and the efficacy was proven by the improvement in neck pain, and this was measured on the neck disability index with a so-called NDI. Yeah, and this was exactly the study objectives of this new clinical prospective double-blind randomized study. Yeah, the indication were patients with cervical spine syndrome in 10 treatments with the Ryocomp PS1000 Polar 4.0 over a period of 70 days for the treatments. Yes, there was a validated questionnaire about pain and the quality of life, and this was the study synopsis. I will show one thing, and I think this is the most important result, what happened after unblinding and having the treatment results of the placebo group and the Varum group. You can see in this picture on the left side the Varum group, the group with a working Ryocomp PS1000 Polar 4.0, and on the right side you can see the placebo group. Yeah, the red ones shows the situation before the treatments, and the blue ones after the treatment. And you can see that the start was nearly at the same NDI level in the Ryocomp group and in the placebo group. But after the treatments, the Ryocomp group has a significantly lower NDI. That means that we were able to reduce the chronic pain. And on the placebo group, you can see it is nearly on the same level than before. And that means no dipole antenna system, no result, no effect on the body. Very, very, very interesting. Yeah, and we have a summary. The summary is a significant improvement of the neck disability index in the group of Ryocomp therapy. We had in the group no adverse events in relation to the Ryocomp therapy. Very important also, of course, because many patients are asking, can it be harmful for me? Of course, and we can show no with in vitro studies, and with this in vivo study we can show that under the influence of this frequency we have no adverse events. The only, I would say, little side effect is mostly that the patients under the influence of this treatment are getting tired, and when they are treated, mostly they are sleeping after a few minutes. The reason for that is very easy. It is comparable with the situation when you are eating at lunch, for example, and when you are eating, your energy is focused then definitely in the digestive system of your body, and therefore you are getting tired. And when we are working with bioresonance, we are stimulating regulatory effects, and this needs also energy for the body, and therefore the body gets tired, and mostly these patients are sleeping very, very fast. Yeah, and we had another thing. We had a significant improvement of physical and psychological quality parameters under the Ryocomp therapy. And in the scientific world of these studies, we are producing with this study so-called claims. That means we can make now with this study an advertisement to say, yeah, with the bioresonance, according to Paul Schmidt, we can, for example, treat successful chronic pain situations. Or we can, and we have, I think, more than 10 claims. For example, we can treat successful with bioresonance, according to Paul Schmidt, shoulder pain, or for example, pain in the back, and so on. There's a long list, and you can find everything on this study, which is also published on the official German website of clinical studies. And you can get this book, of course, in, I think, 7 different languages to show that it is really working. And this shows that under the influence of frequencies, we are able to stimulate regulatory mechanisms which help the body to come back to a healthy situation. Yeah, and with this mathematical and with this physical fundament, yes, I present it to you. And of course, with this huge number of studies, and of course, with this very important gold standard study, I showed the results to you, we can show that frequency medicine, like bioresonance, according to Paul Schmidt, is really working. And we found a very nice wording from, I think, the most important scientist we ever had here on Earth. And this is, of course, Albert Einstein. And he said, future medicine will be the medicine of frequencies. This is exactly what we are doing here at Rionex Biomedical with bioresonance, according to Paul Schmidt, that we are treating with frequencies humans and animals in a successful but also in a very soft way. Yeah, as I said before, that we have in this webinar also a guest. And this is a very special guest, and it is for me a very, very big pleasure to introduce to you now Professor Dr. Dartsch.
Yeah, Mr. Heimes, thank you very much for the invitation to be here together with you and to present, I think, very interesting actual data on basic research.
That's really true. Yeah, and you can see this on the chart. We are working now more than 12 years together, and I remember very well when we started with the first in vitro study. Yeah?
I remember this too. It was at the beginning a lot of not problems but thinkings, how to make the experimental setup, how we can prove the beneficial effects of the mini Rionex, and so to arrange in vitro studies which could also represent an essential part of our organism.
Mm-hmm. Professor Dartsch, we talked about in vitro studies. From your point of view, why it is so important to create and to establish a research on in vitro studies?
Mm-hmm. In vitro studies really means, in our case, cell biological studies. That means we have cultivated cells in petri dishes or culture plates, which represent a part of the whole organism. For example, we can use connective tissue fibroblasts, as we did in the first studies, which represent the situation of a part of the skin. We cannot simulate the effect on a whole organism, but on a special part of it. And we can conclude what might happen in case of a whole organism. Mm-hmm. Moreover, in vitro studies or cell biological studies, they do not use animal experiments. They also do not use any persons involved in these studies. Mm-hmm. So the variety between the individuals is much less in cell biological studies than in the other cases. Moreover, we can do investigations which needs for in vivo situation an invasion process which is not allowed, and therefore we can go just into the center of that what happens in an organism. And that's the cause why in vitro studies are so fruitful, so interesting at first step to prove the effects which have been reported by users of the mini-ryonics.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and from the scientific point of view, I think it is very important also that a cell biological study is permanently related to significance without a placebo effect. Of course, when we have a cell tissue, this cell tissue cannot have a placebo effect like in vivo. And therefore it is perfectly made to establish pure scientific data to show that a system is working or not.
Correct. This means it's not only pure scientific data, there are also so-called basic scientific data, which are very neutral, because cells cannot be influenced by anything.
Yeah.
And therefore, we had a lot of care in the experimental setup that the placebo ryonics and the real mini ryonics were separated in a way so that they could not influence each other and could falsify the results.
Yeah, of course. And this is also important. In vitro studies are, I would say, faster and quicker than in vivo studies, which can be over years, for example, and they can give very interesting ideas to realize an in vivo study and to know or to realize this with a better feeling, not to make an investment which will really work.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. The in vitro studies give a first hint on things that might happen, which have to be improved further on in vivo studies, which take a long time more and which are more complicated in their setup than in vitro studies. That's correct.
Yeah. Yeah, and everything started with our collaboration regarding a cell biological study in 2014. And this was the year with the first in vitro study regarding the Dartsch Scientific Institute.
Yeah, yeah, it was the first in vitro study on the beneficial effect of the mini ryonics. And we had, for example, demonstrated here by photographs on the left side, we had two so-called 96-well dishes, which were separated by each other by a mini ryonics, which was placed between both culture plates in order to see if there might be a difference in the effect on the one in comparison to the other side of the mini ryonics. What we really measured was the cellular activity. That means the mitochondrial activity, the enzymatic mitochondrial activity, which is essential as an energy metabolism from the cells. And what we did was a reaction mixture after the mini ryonics exposure, a reaction mixture consisting of a tetrasodium dye, which was cleaved by the activity of the cells, and thus entered or changed their color from orange, here shown on the left, to yellow, shown on the right. And this difference can be measured easily so that you are able to quantify the effect of the mini ryonics on the mitochondrial enzyme activity. And what we could demonstrate was that the mini ryonics exposed cells had a cell activity which was increased up to 45% within 24 hours of exposure in comparison to a placebo Ryonex. This means we had a clear proof that the mini Ryonex had a stimulating effects on the cellular activity, in this case on connective tissue fibroblasts.
Okay, this is a cell biological study with the mini Ryonex. This is a portable device of bioresonance, according to Paul Schmidt. Of course, we are using this device because it is small, and we can use it in your incubators, for example. There's no space for a polar, therefore we are using the mini Ryonex. But of course, we have to know that a mini Ryonex has a dipole antenna system in it, we discussed before, and we are comparing here a device which is working with a dipole antenna system in it with a placebo without a dipole antenna system. And that's, I think, really an interesting part, and to see that we can really increase the cell activity up to 45% in 24 hours. It's a fantastic result. At that time.
Absolutely. I think so too. We had such an increase very, very seldom before on other cell biological studies. So the mini Ryonex is very much in front of a positive influence on the cellular activity.
True. And then also we discussed the cell regeneration.
The cell regeneration is a process in which a artificial wound, that means a cell-free space, is colonized by the cells. And you have the cells migrating and proliferating for 24 up to 48 hours to close this cell-free space, this artificial wound. And you can measure later on, after fixation and after staining the cells, the quantity of the closure of this cell-free space. And what you can see here on the micrographs on the left is, on the upper micrograph, the remaining cell-free space after 48 hours in case of a placebo Ryonex, and in the lower picture, the remaining cell-free space in case of an exposure to the mini Ryonex. And what you can really see very easily, that the cell-free space is, in case of the mini Ryonex exposed cells, much smaller than in the case of the, let's say, uninfluenced control cells, the placebo Ryonex. And this means, when you are quantifying this, that you get an increase by about 20%, that the mini Ryonex is able to increase cell regeneration, the cell regeneration process, here also in case of the fibroblasts of the connective tissue.
And we talked about the doctorate before, and in relationship to these investigations during the doctorate, we repeat exactly the study we did before in 2014. And I think it was really a fantastic result that after 8 years we realized the same results than before.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and it was very astonishing that the data from 2014 and the data from 2022 were very similar. This means, although there was a time period of 8 years between the two different mini Ryonexes, or better to say mini Ryonex devices, the data were absolutely comparable and also demonstrated that the mini Ryonex from 2022 had the same beneficial effects than those from 2014.
You know that the Ryanex Biomedical is a medical device producer, and therefore under the control of the authorities here in Germany. And each year we have an audit with them, and we have to show that the system is working well, and we have to create follow-up studies. And therefore it is so interesting. And in February, in the next February, we will have the next audit, and we will present them exactly these results to show that the significance and that the influence is the same than 8 years ago. This is a perfect follow-up demonstration, and it shows how important in vitro studies can be.
Yeah, I think so too. They demonstrate the continuity of the mini Ryanex devices and their effect on the cellular level.
Yeah, and when we are talking about lifetime, we have mini Ryanexes with more than 30 years in the market. Yeah, and therefore we know that these devices, 30 years old, are working in the same way than than today. Yeah, it's really unbelievable. Therefore, I think a good explanation also for all the users worldwide that they can use it really over years and years.
Yeah, maybe we should have a closer look on the mini Ryanex devices 30 years ago.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, but this is the activity we did before, and now we want to speak a little bit about the activity we realized in the last months. Yeah, and we have to talk about the new peer-reviewed publication of the mini Ryanex regarding
the intestinal barrier.
Yes,
it's a completely different topic because the first experiments done in 2022 were done with the connective tissue fibroblasts. But we supposed that an influence on connective tissue fibroblasts might have also an influence deeper within the organism, in the inner part of the organism. And we had a closer look on the effects on the integrity of the intestinal barrier.
When we are talking here about this peer-reviewed, first of all, I think it is interesting to know what is the meaning of peer-reviewed.
Yeah. There are different kinds of publication possible. One is a publication by just sending a manuscript to an editor, and he takes this manuscript into his journal. But peer-reviewed, it's the scientific way, means that there are reviewers which are looking on the contents of the manuscript, on the scientific data, how they have been generated, what about the statistical significance, and all these features which are essential for science. And when this peer review process has been finished and a manuscript has been taken for publication, maybe by some minor alterations within the manuscript, then one can be very proud on it because it is sufficient to pass the scientific level of a communication. And this is just in this case, in this first peer-reviewed publication, demonstrating the integrity of the intestinal barrier.
That's true, and it is published in an American journal. Yes, the Advance in Bioengineering and Biomedical Science Research, and that's exactly what we are doing. Therefore, this is a perfect journal for us.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about the results and what was the investigation.
The investigation, as already mentioned, deals with the intestinal wall barrier and its integrity. One should imagine that the intestinal wall is very essential to separate the blood from the intestinal lumen and its contents from food and from enzymatic products which are needed for digestion. When this intestinal barrier is not working as it should, because the so-called tight junctions, that means the connections between the single intestinal epithelial cells, are not so tight, then it is possible that unwanted substances from the intestine can come into the blood by diffusion and may harm some unwanted effects on the organism. Therefore, the integrity is very, very essential, and there are also some diseases which have been described to be in context of this not completely intact intestinal wall, such as leaky gut, or also morbus Crohn, are together with some chronic inflammatory processes out of that kind. And what we investigated was if a mini Rayonics device is able to strengthen the intestinal wall barrier in comparison to placebo Rayonics. And we really found a strengthening by 30% by the mini Rayonics device. We did these investigations by measuring the so-called transepithelial resistance. That means we had electrodes which were in two compartments within the cell culture dish where the cells were cultivated, one representing the blood, the other representing the content of the Darm lumen. And we found a much higher transepithelial resistance in case of the mini Rayonics devices when compared with the placebo effect.
Mm-hmm. But this was only one point.
This is one point. Right. That's correct.
Yes.
The story goes on.
Yes.
Now, we thought about the fact that such a strengthened barrier, intestinal wall barrier, might also be more resistant against oxidative stress. And we induced oxidative stress by the addition of different concentrations of hydrogen peroxide. That means we had reactive oxygen radicals directly on the cells. And after 24 hours, we measured the resistance of the intestinal wall barrier and found that the strengthened intestinal wall barrier by the mini Rayonics device was also more resistant after the production, after generation of oxidative stress when compared with the placebo Rayonics device.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is, from my point of view, totally fascinating and a fantastic idea to organize now a test which is exactly the same what happened in the colon. For example, mm-hmm. Yes, mm-hmm. That, for example, food which can produce oxidative stress mm-hmm. and can produce diseases like morbus Crohn, inflammatory diseases, and so on. And it is really interesting to see that you can measure that.
Yeah, yeah, that's also a fantastic possibility. And overall, one has to consider that the well-being of the intestine, of the gut, is a very essential point for the well-being of the whole organism.
Of course.
Because you do not have only digestion, you have also immune response within the gut, which is also essential for the defense against microbial pathogens.
Of course, and I think everybody understands very, very easily how important the intestinal wall barrier is, yes? Because this is exactly the border between the body, yes, mm-hmm. and the world, I would say, what is inside the colon, yes?
Yeah.
That's the point. And when this can be strengthened, this can be a totally new way of usage of the mini RNAs or the bioresonance, according to Paul Schmidt, in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true. And we also did another point. We had a closer look on the regeneration process within the intestinal epithelial cells. Because when you have a traumatization of the intestinal barrier and it becomes leaky, it should be closed very soon, very fast. And we could also demonstrate that the regeneration process by closing a cell-free space was increased by more than 12% by use of the mini Ryonex device in direct comparison to the placebo device. And that's also a third very essential aspect of the situation and of the beneficial effects of the mini Ryonex.
Yeah, that's really true. We have this mini Ryonex now with different frequencies, but all the time with a basic frequency, which is in the mini Ryonex also, for example, with the mini Ryonex 5G or mini Ryonex LC and whatever. But the basic frequency is exactly the same. Therefore, we have, meanwhile, I do not know that you know that, but we have really a mini Ryonex family. Yes, meanwhile. And of course, we have now a questioning here at Ryonex from potential users, big clinics and so on, and partners in the world who want to create their own individual mini Ryonex. This is very interesting. You can see with that how huge and how big is the interest in the mini Ryonex device. Yeah, it is really, for us, it is a door opener into the world of bioresonance, according to Paul Schmidt. And it is very nice to see, because we have this device also here on internet platforms like Amazon, for example. And we have hundreds of case reports. We are not allowed to say that, by the way. Yes, but it is really interesting to see how's the effect. But there was not really at the moment effects in case of this kind of diseases. Therefore, we can open a new door of usage.
Yeah,
fantastic.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
I think it's really fantastic, and so we decided to go ahead with this kind of study and to go ahead in a way that we do not make an endpoint quantification as we did up to now in this published study, but to have a closer look on the dynamic process, what happens within the cells. We can do that by using time-lapse video micrography, and so we can reduce the time of about 24 or 48 hours to a time of about 30 or 40 seconds. So we can see what happens there. Is there any influence on the migratory or proliferative activity of the cells? What happens with the cells when they get to oxidative stress with the protection by a mini Ryonex device in comparison to a non-protected situation by using a placebo device?
Yeah, it is really fantastic that you are now starting with this new study, yes, and trying to produce this I would say this video clip about that. This is totally important because we can visualize in a fantastic and easy way the understanding of and of course the influence of bioresonance, according to Paul Schmidt, to tissues. And when, for example, a practitioner, a medical doctor, or wherever can show this to patients, this will be very impressive and helps to understand how the system is working and what they are doing.
Yeah. So
great.
I'm very interested in what might happen within these videos, and maybe that we are able to present the effect on the dynamic situation very soon.
Okay, that's great. What we want to do is definitely regarding this new results and new investigations you presented here. We want to add in the near future a new webinar about the diseases which will be there when we have problems with the intestinal wall barrier, with inflammatory effects, and so on, to look a little bit deeper from the medical side to these points. And when we can add then the video from you, this will be, I think, perfect.
Yeah, I think there's two.
Therefore, great idea.
Also, the situation that we can span the information from the basic research, as is done in my institute, and combined with the situation of a medical doctor who can see this in his patients. And so maybe we get a very good connection with both together, and to increase the information of the study much more than it is now.
Yeah, that's really true. Yeah, and therefore we can say we will continue our research. Yeah, and thank you so much for being here in the webinar. This was great, and I think it was a very nice experience for everyone to know now the person behind all this work we published in the past. And therefore, thank you again.
Thank you very much for being here.
Okay.
And thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah. Great success, and take care of you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.